Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a job for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. We are enjoying a great afternoon here over at the Everything Old is New Again studios with the young and communicative David Cohen.
Yes, communicative.
Now, why are you so communicative? What's that about?
Well, we have a really special guest today I'm really excited about, and it's all about communication. So,
well, let's start it up. Let's tell us who we've got.
Well, we have with us today Alan Alda, who, as everybody knows, internationally recognized actor, writer, and author. He's won 7 Emmy Awards. 7, Doug. That's impressive. Tony nominations, Academy Award nominations. We all, remember him as Hawkeye from M.A.S.H. But there's more, right?
Well, he's been inducted to the Television Hall of Fame. He also, if you remember, he's done the Scientific American. He hosted that show for about 11 years,
right,
and founded right down the road from us here in East Northport and Stony Brook, in Stony Brook University, the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. How about that? And what else? He's basically now has released his 3rd book, 2 prior bestsellers. The 3rd one, If I Understood You. Would I have this look on my face? My adventures in the art and science of relating and communicating. Welcome, Alan Alda.
Thank you. I'm exhausted after that.
Yeah, we thought maybe we lost you there, but it's good to hear you're still there.
You reminded me of how much I had to do. I should be lying down now.
And unfortunately, we only have 1 minute left to the show now since it's been so long.
Right.
Now, speaking of radio, I wanted to take you all the way back. You are familiar with radio back in the day, WFUV in Fordham. You were on the air there, weren't you?
I was. I had a couple of radio shows. I wrote and directed radio shows. I'd write a 15-minute show on the way to school on the 3rd Avenue L, and then I'd find classmates who could act in it, and then I'd put it on the air, and it was really exciting.
Sounds like the preparation we do for our show.
Well, the old 3rd Avenue L, you made it new again.
There you go.
Exactly.
There you go. Everything old is new again. Now, listen, being immersed in the art of communication from radio, and of course you've been in television, movies, writing, directing, hosting. What's it about communicating with others that interests you so much to actually get involved in writing this book?
Well, I think I found when we were doing the show you mentioned, Scientific American Frontiers, on PBS, that I was using a technique to do the interviews that I had trained for as an actor and that I had worked on as an actor on the stage. And that was improvisation and the spontaneity that comes from connecting to the other person, relating to them in a kind of a rich, specific way, not just in a general way. Here I am talking at you, and there's sort of a blur on your face, but I don't know what's going on inside your head. And what I found over the years was the more I really observed the other person, the more the connection improves. And the more the connection improves, the better the communication gets. So I thought I knew something that was kind of interesting about communication, so I started working on the book. And interestingly, working on the book for the last couple of years has made me a better communicator. I actually pay better attention to people now.
And further, then we take communication into the realm of science and the medical profession and doctors themselves. And I just want to throw this body part at you. I know it'll mean something to you, but
you're going to throw a body part at me?
Yeah. Figuratively speaking.
I want to tell you, I'm really glad we're on the telephone.
All right, let's see if I can even pronounce this: maxillary labial frenum. And that certainly has a.
It sounds like a really big deal, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's something that all of us have, and something that I think was.
Yours was removed, Doug. I think.
Well, actually, Mr. All was removed, and I think that may have inspired in some way, at least your turn with this book to the medical profession. No.
No, that happened by itself. But we've reached the point where the audience is way behind us now.
Correct.
We're talking about a maxillary frenum or whatever the hell it is. It's that little piece of tissue between your gum and your upper lip. Everybody listening can stick their tongue up there and find it. And I'm not exactly sure what it's for, but when the dentist cut mine, my lips started to droop, and I couldn't make a smile very well. And I was making a movie a couple of weeks later, and the cameraman said, what are you sneering for? You're supposed to be smiling in this scene. I didn't know I was sneering. So he had done a smilectomy on me, and he didn't seem too concerned about it because he wanted to make sure I didn't sue him. That was his main concern. So that gave me a little insight into how communication between doctors and patients can really go badly in the absence of something very simple, which is letting the patient know you care about them.
Right. And if you really think about it, when I define my experience with a doctor, many times, let me put it this way, the doctor I have now, he'll actually examine me and call me into his office and sit down for a few minutes and talk about everything that just went on and what the results were and how I'm doing and so forth. And so there is at least a perceived empathy that I have from him. And I don't necessarily know that it's not true, but I'm just saying I don't know what's going on in his mind, but I can say that I define my experience with him and that he's a good doctor, if you will, more than half of which based upon this, I guess you would call it bedside or office side manner, by actually asking me questions, listening to what I say, and then telling me what's going on with my body. Does that ring a bell?
Well, when you talk about perceiving that he's empathic, that turns out to be very important. There was one study done that showed that when the patient regarded the doctor as empathic or empathetic, the patient was 19% more likely to follow the doctor's advice. And that sounds like a big number to me. That sounds like there's life and death in there among some of those percentage points.
Right, and it's amazing how some doctors, and I've known quite a few in my family too, that they go through school and they study and then they intern and then they go to the hospitals and so forth and begin their practice, and it's almost like me. I'm a lawyer by profession. No one taught us the copy machine, and it's like the most basic thing. And if it goes wrong, what do you do? And I would suggest that for doctors, one of the most basic things is that discussion or that idea of, let me at least try to present the service that I'm providing to this person in a way that they understand, and like you say, listen to what this person's saying back. Maybe we can find out what's wrong with them by even getting some input from the individual.
That's right, and that's one reason why medical schools and hospitals are asking us more and more at the Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook to train their doctors, because they realize it contributes to the patient's health and well-being. But in addition to that, when patients leave a hospital, they fill out a questionnaire now, and if they don't rate the doctors as caring, it affects the income for the hospital. I think they get less from Medicare. There's some way in which a lower rating means less money for them. So they have several motivations. The best motivation is just trying to do good and help people be healthy.
Exactly, and we're talking with Alan Alda, who represented and acted as a doctor on M.A.S.H, as we know, and that sort of was a precursor. I'll leave you with this for a moment because we're just going to be right back right after this break. But as Hawkeye Pierce, there was that presentation of empathy throughout the series. I'll leave it there. I can't have you answer the question. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again with Alan Alda.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
This is Douglas Viviani, and we're with Alan Alda, who wrote a book, If I Understand You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? Take a look at this. It's a great read, and it will give you a great, I think, insight into even relationships with the opposite sex. When I was dating, I got set up, and I later would go out with this young lady, lady, and I would hear from the person the next day, how was the date? And I said, well, you know what, I don't really know, because if she would have asked me a question, I guess I would have had a better time. But I basically was like on a talk show. I kind of did a talk show or a monologue with these young ladies, and I don't know if it was certainly had to be partly my fault as an immature communicator. Certainly maybe they were intimidated, or I don't know what was their situation, but they didn't necessarily participate. But so that raises...
Wait, bring me up to date.
Yes.
Did you ask her any questions?
I did. I would ask questions, and it was like a talk show. I would be like Johnny Carson, and I would be getting all this. And she never would turn it around and say, well, what about you? What color do you like? Or whatever the question was.
That's unusual. It's usually the woman asking the questions. That's from what I haven't been on a date in 60 years, so I don't know.
Exactly. Well, that's why it took me till 42 to find the girl of my dreams that actually asked the question back. But along those lines, do we listen to each other when we have conversations and you have an agenda and you want to impress another person? That's really something that kind of can get in the way. So how do we actually stop a communication or an event like that and actually get that young lady to talk to us and have her being interested in what we have to say and vice versa?
I think it really is a question of relating to the other person, and in a sense of improvisation is really a good idea, because if you follow wherever something goes, then two strangers can become interested in something that neither one thought to talk about beforehand. You can drop your agenda, or you can drop the worry about how am I doing? Does this person like me? Can I trust this person? Just playing with talk. It's really a question of tossing a ball back and forth. And you can do that better, I think. I think we found that you really can do it better when you're letting the other person into your consciousness. You're really looking at them, seeing the color of their eyes, the color of their hair. I can talk to somebody for 10, 15 minutes before I notice that, and I'm trying to pay attention to these things.
Right.
You really got to you have to urge yourself to do it.
And especially in a new relationship or a new communication, like we're just getting to know each other now, it's a little harder over the radio, but the idea is, rather than think about the next question, of course you have to have something in mind what you want to do, but and putting aside the idea you want to impress somebody or what have you, to actually focus in and be open to improv. Even life is improv, but if you don't have some training in it or some ideas to even that's what's happening in a conversation, you're going to have like a script in your mind as opposed to, let me hear what this person's saying and react to that and not worry about what's the next thing I'm going to say until it comes out naturally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so. I think that without that sense of relating, you have two dueling monologues. You don't have an exchange. You don't have some interaction between the two of you. And I think improv is an ideal way to get a sense of that, and it's maybe the best way. But it's not the only way, and not everybody has a chance to do that. And while I was writing the book, I realized that I tend to lose touch with it, and I think we all do. I don't know why we do, because it feels so good to make contact with another person. But we retreat, and we have to keep working on making contact and establishing this relating stance that we need to have to communicate. So I just concentrate on ways I can observe the other person better, and that puts me in contact with them. And I need to know what they're feeling and what they're thinking, or at least I have to have a pretty good idea. You can't know completely, but if you understand where the other person is in terms of their perspective on things and how they see things and why they see things the way they do, then you can really talk to that person instead of some generalized person that is not really there in front of you, but is a stereotype of who you think you're talking to.
And in some way, you talk about in the book that certainly empathy is important, and how you tried to bring that about, or whether it happened naturally or not, on M.A.S.H., where you had a tight-knit group of people on screen, but you sort of didn't know them in the beginning. So tell us what you used to do
we used to, first of all, it was very cold when we shot the pilot out in the mountains in Malibu, and we were in Hawaiian shirts and freezing to death. And we stood around an oil drum with a fire in it between shots and hugged one another. And that you got to know the other person pretty well after a week of that. And then when we were shooting the show, for most of those 11 years, between shots, they take like an hour to light a set before you can do the next scene. And instead of going to our dressing rooms, most of the time we'd sit in a circle of chairs and make fun of one another and laugh. And that connection we developed was something we brought into the scene when we finally were doing the scene a little while later. And that connection played out as real people in a real setting really talking to one another. It gave the scenes a little boost of reality and a genuine feeling of something taking place. And I tried to duplicate that every time I act with other people. I try to get together with them before the show or before a scene and talk and play and have fun, kid each other.
And then you could test their boundaries a little bit. If this person, you can kid with them a little bit and they'll smile, or are they very serious and don't go that route because you're offending them or something like that, I guess?
No, you have to be ruthless. You make fun of them until they laugh, and they make fun of you. When I was doing the play Art on Broadway, there were 3 of us in the play, and we sat for an hour before every performance, and we talked about anything. We didn't talk about the play. We just talked about our day. And as soon as someone got sincere, the other 2 would let them have it.
See that, and that's part of the improv that you're talking about too. I guess that when you're open to that, and when you're not just thinking about the play itself, but let me get to know who this person that I'm going to be in this play with for so long. That opens the idea to a better communication, and more empathy. And what I'm trying to say and segue into a smidge here is that in the book you've presented quite a number of basic games for improvisation that people can do, almost if you feel like doing at home, cocktail parties or what have you. They're fun games that opens your mind to this kind of thinking.
Yeah, I that's possible. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I think the subtleties of these games and exercises kind of require a trained person to lead them. But I guess people might try them and see if they get anywhere, but they could maybe go down the wrong path. We at the center, Stony Brook, we have a kind of a strict training program for people who are going to teach this, and they have to get certified in order to be able to say they're using our methods. And the reason for that is I've seen some improv classes that were really they led nowhere. They didn't lead to any better communication. In fact, they led to worse communication. But there are things people can do, like reading novels, good literature where the emotions of the characters are very pronounced and you can follow them emotionally. That leads to establishing more empathy in the reader. This is kind of funny. Somebody suggested watching emotional programs on television with the sound off, and you try to figure out what emotions the actors are going through. So what it really involves is what I suggest in general, which is read the other person, just reading the clues you get from the body language and the tone of voice, and try to figure out what's going on inside them. And that changes things. It changes your tone of voice. It changes the way you talk to them. And as you change, they change. They see it in you, and there's like this dynamic relationship. It really makes what you're trying to settle together or what you're trying to communicate to another person much easier.
Fortunately, we are going to take a break for a moment, but we'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again with Alan Alda. If I Understood You, what I have this look on my face.
Look in my head.
Buy the book and you'll see the look.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dee Dee Sorvino, co-author of Pino Pasta and Parties, along with your favorite good fella,
Paul Sorvino, and we are here to tell you that you should be listening every day, all day long. Wake up to it and sleep with it. Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome. You can hear the excitement in Paul Sorvino's voice there when he introduces us. And Everything Old is New Again. We're excited to be with Alan Alda, author of If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? It's a dive into communication and a better way to communicate with all of us. And there's a touch there of a reference. We always have a Star Trek reference. All the listeners are kind of aware of that. I'm going to present something to Mr. Old and see if this makes any sense. Dr. McCoy versus Mr. Spock. That's the basis of Star Trek. That's basically a representation, I think, of emotion versus logic. Now, in your book, you talk about empathy, which is an emotional characteristic, I would suggest, and the theory of the mind. And I'm wondering if you can detail that and see that that's the core of communication or the core of what you're saying, or does that make no sense at all?
No, I think that that's very much at the heart of communication. The theory of mind is the idea. It's the scientific term for this idea that at a certain age, around 4 or 5, children start to realize that other people might have something in their thoughts that's different from what the kid has in her thoughts. That they develop a theory of the other person's mind and realize that it could be something different from what they're thinking. Up until then, when the kid thinks something, the kid thinks the other person knows what they're thinking, which is why they don't start lying till around 4 or 5.
Right.
There's no point in lying if they know what you're thinking. But we can use theory of mind. We can get clues from from the body language and that kind of thing, the look on somebody's face, and figure out what they're thinking, and we can also figure out what they're feeling, which is, as you say, empathy. But there's this kind of tug of war sometimes between thinking and feeling. And actually, if you put them in the service of each other and let them cooperate and collaborate, things can go a lot better. At least that's what I think I found in my own life. What's your impression of that? Do you feel that you're going to live most effectively if you're just totally rational and ignore your feelings, or live emotionally and just take a leap at everything?
I think that's the key to the success of Star Trek, because that's, I think, whether we know it or not and put it into words or not, I think that's the eternal struggle. That might even, even politically, in some genres or some, I don't want to get into the politics, but some people think and make the decisions based on very emotional points of view and maybe throw the logic out, and some people go to the logic and throw the emotion out. I'm a little bit more of the logical side. I say that you can't ignore the emotions, and I'll tell you, I'm more of a logical person, but I find my comedy by when I try to be funny to be something that I'm saying something that's totally illogical and go to the emotion of the person. And I'll just finish the answer with when you watch a show like America's Got Talent, you see some of these people. The other night there was a young girl on there that is a musician, lost a hearing at 18. 10 years later was on stage singing and performing her own song. She's totally deaf, and it was very emotional for me. And so it does, you can't ignore either, but what a question that is. I don't know how to answer that other than that, which is a kind of a non-answer. How do you
I think it's been shown or suggested in some studies that even when you think you're making a logical decision, you're referencing a lot of emotions in the process of making the decision, and you might not even be aware of it, but decisions seem to be a mixture of logic and emotion, and often more emotion than you imagine.
See that? It definitely makes sense.
But doesn't for me, sometimes the logic kicks in. If I'm expressing a certain emotion in any given situation to another person, and I see that maybe that's not the best approach because I'm not really getting enough back from the other person, I think logically, in my mind, I say, okay, let's stop. Let's try empathizing a little bit instead of getting angry, or let's try some other emotional approach to see if we can keep this communication going on. So I think for me, that's where the logic comes in. We're intelligent enough to know, hopefully, that the approach we're taking isn't working. Let's try something different.
Yeah, that's helpful. And what you're describing, I think, is a collaboration between logic and emotion, where you go back and forth between the two. But it is fun to see how very often we make a decision, and whether we've made a good one or a bad one, we can say how logical it was to make that decision. Well, I mean, in retrospect, you can ascribe all kinds of logic to why you did something, even if you did it on a totally emotional basis.
Well, I think what David was describing too was your logic. David was telling you to use emotion to communicate with the person.
Exactly.
Which is
Yeah,
kind of,
right. That's why I was saying it. So you're describing a nice collaboration between the two.
So I think we'd be nothing without, if we were either or one way or the other, I think we'd be totally unsuccessful. I think the mix is to try to, or the combination is to try to, and a successful combination would lead you to be able to communicate well with others. And I think what is interesting in the book, you talk about autism, and you talk about, an autistic person, generally speaking, has difficulty looking someone in the eyes, difficulty with an empathetic idea of what is that other person thinking, and a sort of, in a general idea is, they're sort of in their own world or in their own body, and by using apparently some improv and some other types of learning tools, you describe in your book how you're able to at least have these autistic people become a little more empathetic and therefore a little more part of our world, if that makes sense.
Right, and they can get used to the vagaries, the varieties of an uncertain life, because all of life is uncertain, and it can throw you if you're not used to coping with the uncertainty of life. And improv, for instance, I know a psychologist who trains autistic people using improv games and exercises, and it gives them much more flexibility and the ability to function the way people around them are functioning very much.
And so if it helps someone that has difficulty with that, whether it be genetic, I guess, with autism or not, I think it's a good lesson for all of us to just, when we communicate and think about what's happening in an everyday world. You have a story about we'll get to this, I guess, in the next section. We're running out of time, but about a cab driver that you had an experience with a cab driver, just being able to turn another person that's kind of not having a good day, apparently, or someone that is appearing to be like I'm in court, and I kind of diffuse people. I say it's the Columbo method, where I don't come on strong and tell my adversary how great I am and what a great a case I have and what have you. I let them talk, and I just kind of say, oh, but what about this and what about that? So in other words, you're not battling someone head to head, because in the environment of lawyers, we know that that's sort of what their makeup is. So if I'm empathetic to the other side, I can kind of disarm them and get a little bit better result. If that's
I think so. I think so. Your argument is probably not going to land on them unless you know where they are, who they are, what they're thinking, what they're feeling.
Right, and respect what they're saying, not just immediately say, no, you're wrong, and not even, listen to them finish a sentence, Yeah. Give them the ground, give them the floor, so to speak, to say what they want to say, and then maybe say, well, but I think your hole in the argument is this point or that point, and I think that's at least, if they're open to it, and that's the next thing we'll talk about in the next section, being open to communicating, and that's part of the situation here. You do need to be have an open mind, and we're have an open mind here, and everything old is new again with Alan Alda. We'll be right back to continue talking about, if I understood you, would I have this look on my face? Did I say that right? We'll be back right after this.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Okay, what is happening now, Jay? Well, we're going to return to Everything Old is New Again with Doug and Dave. Oh, okay. I got nothing else better to do.
There you go. We have nothing else better to do than to enjoy a very interesting discussion with yet another star of the 70s and who has continued his career up until right now, Alan Alda, that's been on around with us in our mindset for a long time, and we're happy and ecstatic to have this television Hall of Famer with us, and he's talking about, if I understood you, would I have this look on my face. It's a great book, a New York Times best-selling author, by the way. 2 prior books. You can look at those on Amazon as well. They're great books. Your books are very thoughtful, Mr. Alda. You can even take a story about a dog that you had as a child in another book, I think it is, that passed away, and your dad wanted to have the dog stay around with you, and so that you stuffed the dog, but it left you with a life lesson. Let's put it that way. Even a story like that, you were able to present to a great a lesson with a great audience in a memorable fashion. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I love stories. I love storytelling, and I think that they're even more fun when they have some kind of meaning you can find in them.
I agree, and that's why I'm going to bring this down to me a little bit. I empty the dishwasher twice a day. We're nutso here about this dishwasher. It drives me insane. My wife has her tasks, if you will, around the house. That's something I've taken upon myself, and it, believe it or not, and I think you may agree, in some way, makes my relationship a little bit easier than if you don't do that. Maybe you can get into that a little bit as to why.
Are you kidding? I think doing the dishes is foreplay.
From a gentleman that's married 60 years, so you would know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really involves, the way I look at it, and I feel like I may be hitting this nail on the head too many times, but it involves thinking about what the other person is going to feel when she looks at that pile of dishes in the sink. And that can actually help you do what you know is the right thing to do.
Right, exactly. And just a little insight into my life, just for the heck of it, I actually make a little breakfast and get it in the car for her before she leaves every day. So she leaves with, I hopefully think, is a smile on her face. When she comes home, I don't know if she still has that smile, but that's the thing, is to see what would make her commute a little bit easier. You know, she's got to commute for maybe, 45 minutes in the car. So what would make it more fun for her, or something that's easier that I don't have to, it comes from a selfish place in some ways, because you say that I don't have to hear the aggravation when she comes home, you know?
Well, that's one of the things I've found, you know, as I've tried to up my empathy and connect better with people. I find people less annoying.
Right. It makes sense. And talk about annoying, Larry Gelbart, who was someone that was quite invested in M.A.S.H. and quite a number of other shows, he showed you, and it's in the book here, a little story about how he was so empathetic, he was able to turn around someone that was robbing his house and wielding a gun.
I know. It was an amazing story. He told us the next day he was coming home late at night to his house in Beverly Hills, and a guy stepped out of the bushes holding a gun and said, "Open the front door and let me into your house." And Larry had no choice. He let him into the house. But instead of saying, "You can't do this, what's the matter with you, I should call the police," you know, he didn't do anything like that. He said, "You know, you're too smart to do this. What if I help you get a job?" And he appealed to the guy's sense of his own self-worth, which probably most people wouldn't think of, because it doesn't look like the guy has any self-worth if he's holding a gun on you and wants your jewelry. But the guy put the gun away, and the next day Larry got him a job.
See, but that also was looking right to the motivation, or the possible motivation, of why the person was doing that to begin with. Out of work, needs to feed a family. I mean, possibly. I don't know, or at least
you
himself.
don't know for sure. And the guy might have said, "Screw the job, give me your gold."
Right. But that was just something where he was trying to find out and get into the person's mind. And let's go beyond this particular event, and what is motivating this person to do this right now? Just like what's motivating like a cab driver in New York City maybe I'll just throw the story to tell us your experience recently with a cab driver in the city.
Yeah, I was hailing a cab at Columbus Circle, and he rolled down the window and said, "Where are you going?" And I thought, I drove a cab when I was young, and you don't ask people where they're going. You take them because it's against the law not to take them if they hailed a cab. And then I thought, well, you know, it's the end of the day. He probably has to get back. He's had a long day. Maybe that's why he's asking. He wants to know if I'm going, you know, on his way back to the terminal. So I didn't get upset. I got in the cab. Then he says, I tell him I'm going to 86th Street in Columbus. And he says, what's the cross street? Or I give him the address of on Columbus. He goes, what's the cross street? And then I get angry again. I'm thinking, you're supposed to know that, you know.
Right.
But instead of that, I think so he doesn't know. So there are cross streets I don't know, and I drove a cab. So instead of complaining, I said, I'm looking it up for you on my iPhone. And then he starts to respond to this, and he says, you know, you're a nice person. A lot of people get in this cab, they don't care about the other person. I've had to go to the bathroom for a half an hour, and I'm really uncomfortable, and I really appreciate that. And I thought, the guy's giving me his kidneys now. I can't get out. This is going way too far. We were in an ecstasy of empathy.
Right. Exactly, and that's how you could turn things around, and that's why I wanted to just throw the last thing at you is a little bit of. I mean, everything old is new again. We're trying to do what we can to present stories like this and your book to the general public, because I think it's so worthwhile and so different and something more fun on the radio. But my question is, what did we communicate, or how did we communicate properly with you and your organization to be able to get you to come on our show, if that makes any sense? What did we do right?
I don't know. You called somebody, and they called me.
Exactly, and I think that's what it is. Is sometimes people just like the pretty girl, let's say at the dance, right? You assume that it's not going to happen, so you don't take that step to even ask her to dance.
That's why the connection wipes out fear.
Right.
If you think about the other person, you're not worried how you're doing, and you're not so scared.
And how about being around since, I don't want to say, but, so many years in the industry and being so successful with all the achievements that you've had? Is this something you can impart upon us and all of us in a general way as to what would be kind of a typical question, but, the secret to your longevity and your success in your varied career?
Have fun. That's about it.
Well, we had a minute to fill here, so we'll expand on that. But
what else?
But that's sort of that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is we kind of say we're trying to make radio fun again. There's more to do with radio than I love radio. I've grown up with radio. I just have seen so many things disappear from the radio and all of our lives. I don't know if it's a reflection of society or not, but we're so serious all the time now. And I think fun needs to be brought back to the table, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so, too. And fun, especially with another person, just feels so good. I mean, we've been playing for this whole time we've been on the air together. And it was a much more enjoyable way to spend the time than mechanically trading information, I thought.
Right, like you said before, like I used to go on the dates with two monologues going, or in my case it was one monologue. But yeah, you sort of do want to connect with someone. That's what life's about in a way. And I think this book that it just gives you every clue that you need to try to do that. And so again, if I understood you, would I have this look on my face by Alan Alda? Mr. Alda, thank you very much for being with us on Everything Old is New Again. We look forward to your next publication.
Thank you. It was fun talking with you. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a great day. We'll talk with you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.